Viewers, you would remember that earlier this year, when US President Donald Trump announced that India would have to face reciprocal tariffs, the United States government set a deadline for the 2nd of April to impose these tariffs. Following this announcement, India confirmed that a panel had been sent to the United States to hold discussions on trade tariffs. Now, a panel from the US has arrived in India to discuss the terms on which the basis of these tariffs can be implemented on ground. All right, there's some breaking news coming in from those discussions. The first day of the US-India talks having concluded, the talks were held on spirits, automobiles and pharma sectors. India has indicated that it's ready to lower tariffs on bourbon whiskey. India has also sought a rebate on reciprocal tariffs till a BTA is agreed upon. A free trade agreement, in fact, is agreed upon. We have agricultural equipment, which is another sector that was discussed, is what we're told. Rishabh, any details coming in? What exactly is India willing to concede and how much is US asking for?
Well, Madhav, today's discussion was more on the, reference, terms of reference for that matter, and what can India do and what can India concede upon. That was a major part of discussion today between the interlocutors of India and United States. Remember, the assistant US trade representative for Central and South Asia is in New Delhi. Rakesh Agrawal, for that matter, from Indian side is leading the Indian interlocutor committee, and the major discussion was on pharma, automobile and spirits. On bourbon whiskey, what we are given to understand that around 50% of tariff cut is expected after the first tranche of discussions between the two sides. One sensitive sector, agriculture, is something that is on the table as well. Remember, India has been very, very protective about its agriculture sector. Agricultural equipment, an import of agricultural equipment and tariff on that is something that, India wants a rebate from tariff on, and that is something that is being discussed. A rebate on reciprocal tariff till BTA, which is, we are talking about September or October later this year, is something that is being asked by Indian interlocutors.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. We'll have to leave it there, Rishabh. Thanks so much for getting us that quick update. Let's take this across to our guest now.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 2 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
All right, let me go across to Ashok Sajjanhar, who's still with us. Ashok Sajjanhar, the big question is this. Perhaps no other trade discussions have generated as much heat and controversy as far as these proposals on the 2nd of April are concerned. Clearly, the US wants to see a lot more from India, a lot more in terms of flexibility. But where do you think it is that India can concede? Because there's a lot at stake here, including the fact that the US is one of the top countries that India exports to.
No, absolutely. You're very right. United States is the largest trading partner of India. And United States, we export about $78 billion worth of goods to the United States. And even in services, we run a decent surplus with the United States. So United States has been particularly aggressive on this front. After these reciprocal tariffs were announced, there has been discussion that has been going on because, I would have thought that when we have already agreed, when Prime Minister went there on the 13th of February and we agreed that there's going to be the first tranche of a major bilateral trade agreement, then, in good faith, no reciprocal tariffs should be imposed upon India. But obviously, Mr. Trump has his own thinking, and he had said no, the tariffs would be imposed. So that is why we are having these discussions. Before that, we had seen Piyush Goyal visit Washington, D.C. at the beginning of this month. Before that, Madhav, you would also recall that on 1st February, when our budget was presented, we had made some changes as far as we had given some concessions to the United States in terms of the exports that it makes to India. Even, you would recall that on the 13th of February, when Prime Minister Modi and President Trump met, on that same day we had announced a rebate in the export tariffs of bourbon whiskey coming from the United States to India. So India has demonstrated its good faith and goodwill in terms of working along.
Let me bring in
with the
Dan now.
United States.
Ashok Sajjanhar, if I can just bring in Dan Geltrude, who's an economist joining us. He's also the founder and managing partner of the Geltrude and Company. Dan, you know, India is one of the leading exporters of generic drugs globally. Perhaps some of the cheapest drugs available to American citizens, you know, come from India. At this point of time, you know, many are asking whether these decisions to impose the tariffs are going to hurt, you know, the U.S. citizens themselves. Is point number one. And point number two, what is it specifically that the U.S. would want? You know, across the board, there are different sectors. There may be a difference in terms of perception, but will a broad indication as far as lowering of tariff barriers be enough?
Well, what I think Donald Trump is trying to do here is to get a more level playing field. The good news is that it appears that President Trump and Prime Minister Modi do have a good working relationship, and that's very, very important to Donald Trump in terms of how he works. Now, what I think is going to happen here is that ultimately a deal will be negotiated because President Trump wants a deal. He feels that there are too many inequities between the two countries and that we have to move closer together. We can't have a situation where India's tariffs are anywhere from 5 to 6 times higher than what we have for the United States. So I think if we could move closer together, I think a deal can be struck. President Trump has shown that he is flexible. If more time is needed, I believe, to work out a deal, I believe he will allow for that. So look, in a trade war, no one wins. So it is far better for the two countries, and we are allies, to come together to get a deal that works for everyone.
All right. And in fact, you know, Ashok Sajjanhar, one of the points that's being made, if you compare the two countries, you know, India has $66 billion in exports. The U.S. imports to India are around $23 billion. So it's really a no-brainer what India has to do in that sense to protect the $66 billion, while also, of course, looking at Indian interests. But there's one tricky area where India has traditionally been extremely careful about, protective about, and that's agriculture, because an overwhelming majority of our population is engaged in it. How do you think that's going to play out?
Yeah, Madhav, thank you very much for that question. If you permit, I'd like to make just one comment on what Dan had, just now mentioned, that there should be a level playing field. You know, look at it this way. The United States has a total GDP of $30 trillion. India has a GDP of $4 trillion. United States has a per capita GDP of $88,000. India has a per capita of 2,700. You know, it is not equality, it is equity that we need. And I think as far as our tariffs are concerned, they are fully compatible with our obligations under the WTO. However, I understand, meaning that Mr. Donald Trump is arm twisting and, he's using realpolitik. So maybe, we do whatever it is. But I also see that one point is that maybe it will also benefit India because we need to be a part of the global value chain. So bringing down our tariffs, could be a catalyst in that direction.
Right.
Now, coming to your question, Madhav, what you said about the agriculture, I think what we are going to do, what we have proposed, what we should be proposing is what we have done with Australia and what we have done with the United Arab Emirates. That is, whatever items are of interest to the United States in agriculture, we provide them with a certain quota. So there will be a quota and there will be lower tariffs under that. And I think that is something that would be quite workable. It has worked in the other two FTAs that we have signed.
All right. Dan, that's a very important point that's being made by Ashok Sajjanhar. We don't just need equality. What the need of the hour is equity, because, there's a huge disparity as far as earnings are concerned. And there's no doubt there may be certain sectors which are extremely protectionist in terms of the tax rates, and, those tariffs perhaps need to be lowered. But there are certain interests, in every country would have those areas which are no-go areas. Is that something that's going to be respected is a big question.
Well, I don't blame India for protecting their interests. India should put India first, as the United States would put the United States first. So again, we have to look for common ground here. Just because the United States has a larger GDP doesn't mean that, the United States has to give up so much more in order to get equality there. You have to look at it in terms of what's fair to both nations. And I've said this before. Let's keep in mind that our common nemesis between our two countries is China. So it's in our best interest for us to work together and continue to be trade partners. And I believe everybody wants that, and we will get there.
All right, let's hope we get there. In fact, soon. That's certainly a big question at this point of time. How soon will it take to get there is a big question indeed. Will it be fall this year, as was envisaged during the bilateral meeting? Will it be longer? Thanks so much for joining us, Ashok Sajjanhar, as well as Dan Geltrude.